Hi, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Sue. You feel like some dessert? Something creamy with a crust, custard filling, and luscious whipped cream on the top? Well then I've got the dessert for you, Kadaife Ekmek. We're making it today. Just a reminder, today's recipes and all the recipes we've used on this show so far can be found on our website, Tweeton.com. Be sure to look us up. You'll find our recipes, you'll find ways to order tapes of these cooking lessons, you'll find a way to email me, and I do like hearing from you. And if you have a treasured family recipe, something Greek that maybe I haven't covered yet, if you'd be willing to share that with me, I'd be thrilled. So please email that to me. What we're making today, Kadaife Ekmek, is like many, many Greek dishes. It has three distinct layers. It has a crust, it has a filling, and it has a topping. For the crust, if you're going to really do it the right way, you need some Kadaife pastry dough. Now this is very, very similar to the fillo dough that we find all over the place. The difference is the Kadaife pastry dough is shredded into very, very, very thin strips. It's almost like, bird's nest noodles, that kind of thing. It's so thin. And it's also difficult to come by. Sometimes you just can't find it unless you go to a specialty store. And that involves making a really long trip. So, a good substitute that my grandmother used, my mother and my Aunt Stella used, is right here. Good old-fashioned shredded wheat. But not the little miniature things. It's the big, fat, original biscuits. Get a box of the old-fashioned, big, large, shredded wheat biscuits, and you're in business. You've got a facsimile to Kadaife dough. Now for the crust, you need the shredded wheat. Of course, you need butter, and of course, it has to be unsalted. And then this whole thing needs a syrup on it. So for the syrup, a little bit of honey, some sugar, and a cinnamon stick for flavor. Now this makes up the crust part. Now for the custard filling, you need some more sugar, cornstarch for thickening, milk, egg yolks, 4 egg yolks for thickening and for richness, and a little bit of vanilla. And then to top this all off, you've got to have whipped cream. A pint of whipped cream, some powdered sugar for sweetening, and a little dash of vanilla. Put all these layers together and you have a heavenly dessert. I'm using a 13 by 9 pan. And it definitely needs to have at least 2, maybe 3 inches. It needs to be a high baking pan because there's going to be so many layers on this. And I don't want it all falling all over. Now what I've done is I put just some water in a bowl because I want to just very, very briefly dip the shredded wheat biscuits into the water. The reason I'm going to dip the biscuits just briefly is because true Kadaife dough is a raw dough, and shredded wheat is cooked, it's crisped. So by just dipping it briefly, I'm going to kind of approximate the rawness of the Kadaife dough. And I'm just going to place it in there. Just a real brief dipping. I'm not trying to soak anything up. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I layer the entire bottom of the pan. And although this may sound a little strange, this is a tried and true substitute for Kadaife. You'll find it in many older Greek cookbooks. Now the thing I want to do is just kind of separate things a little, fluff them up a little bit. I want the entire bottom of this pan to be covered with the shredded wheat. So if I need to, I can go back and add a couple more biscuits, but I don't want any holes. And you know what? I think I'm going to add one more biscuit. Just kind of crumble it up. Because this is the base, and we've got to have a good base, otherwise the whole thing's going to fall apart. What the heck? How about one more for good measure? I just want to make sure every possible blank space is covered with the shredded wheat. Okay, that looks good. I have a nice firm foundation, and it is important to have a good foundation. Now the next step is to get some melted butter. I'm going to need 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter. Now that's unsalted, it needs to be the sweet kind. And that's 1.5 sticks. I'm going to melt them in the microwave and get them ready. In it goes. Okay, all done. All I want to do is just make sure that my shredded wheat is in a nice flat layer. Now right now it's taking up a good portion of the pan, and that's okay because after we put the syrup on, everything's going to kind of sink down a bit. What I want to do is take this melted butter and just pour it over the shredded wheat kind of as evenly as I can. This will add to the sumptuous flavor of this dessert. This is not a light dessert by any means, but it's so special and it's impressive. It really is impressive. It's pretty. Okay, now what I need to do is actually bake this. If I were using the raw pastry dough, the butter would help it brown and cook and get rid of that raw flour taste. Because this is shredded wheat, it doesn't need to bake as long. If it were the true Kadaife dough, probably around 40 minutes. This, anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. I'm going to check it at 20 minutes to see how it's doing, and then maybe leave it for 30 minutes. But it does need to bake in a 350-degree oven. The baking will give a nice toasty character to this, kind of brown up the butter. It'll be a delicious, delicious base. And in it goes. While the shredded wheat or Kadaife dough is baking, I'm going to start work on the syrup. First of all, I need 2 cups of sugar. 1, 2. I'm going to need, just for a very, very light honey taste, 2 teaspoons of honey. I need 1 cup of water. This is going to be a very sweet syrup, but it's not going to be a whole lot, just 1 cup of water. I can start stirring it, and for flavoring, I want to add 1 whole cinnamon stick. And the cinnamon stick I'm adding instead of ground cinnamon just because it'll impart some cinnamon flavor, but you won't have to deal with little clumps of bits of ground brown stuff in the syrup. It will be a better syrup. Now this is it. Now what I want to do is just take it over the stove and start getting the sugar dissolved and the syrup cooking. Well, I'm putting this over a fairly high heat, and I want to stir it because I want to make sure that the sugar is completely dissolved. The syrup has come to a boil. All the sugar has been dissolved and now it's boiling. I'm just going to turn the heat down just a little bit, but I want to keep it at a boil, and I want it to boil for about 15 minutes. And this will make the syrup thick. It won't be watery, and it will provide a good base for that kadaife dough. And then the little cinnamon stick, you can see, is floating around in there, giving it a real nice flavor. So I'm just going to leave it alone, 15 minutes. I left this in for 30 minutes. I checked it at 20 minutes, but you know what? I like the brown butter, toasty wheat flavor a whole lot. So I left it in a little longer. But now it's time to come out. That's just perfect. My syrup has been boiling for 15 minutes. And it's a lot thicker now. And I think it's just perfect. I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to remove the cinnamon stick. The kadaife crust has cooled just a little bit, maybe 10 minutes. And now I'm just going to pour the syrup over it. And I can tell the syrup has been infused with that delicious cinnamon. So it's going to be very tasty. This kind of browned butter, toasted wheat, sweet, light honey with cinnamon. Good enough to eat all by itself. But just pour the syrup over just as evenly as you can. And let it sit, because what has to happen is that the shredded wheat, or the kadaife, will absorb all that syrup and form a nice, sweet, moist, solid base for all that fluffy, creamy stuff that's going to go on top. One thing when making this custard, I want to make sure I've got all my ingredients out here with me, because I don't want to be scurrying around at the last minute. First thing I want to do is get my eggs taken care of. I need 4 egg yolks to thicken and enrich the custard. Give it that wonderful silky texture. Anyhow, here we go. Hopefully the yolks will end up here and the egg whites will end up here. Let's see if that happens. Okay, there's one. And you can save the egg whites for any kind of egg dish, an omelet, breakfast, anything. So these are my 4 egg yolks, and I'm just going to set aside the whites for now. This is going to be a cooked custard. It will not be baked. So we're going to do this over the stove, on the stove top. You need a 1/2 cup of sugar for sweetening. And 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. This is not a traditional Greek dessert. It's something that was introduced to Greece many, many, many years ago, but Greek people know what tastes good, and once they tasted this, they liked it. And it's been really popular ever since. Okay, 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. In fact, you can get on some of these websites and actually order an ekmek mix. But as the case with most mixes, I think the homemade stuff is going to taste a whole lot better. Take some time though, but it's a spectacular dessert. Okay, 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. And all I want to do right now is just combine the sugar and the cornstarch. I'm mixing them right up in my saucepan because I don't see the need to dirty an extra bowl. And to this, I want to add 4 cups of milk. When it comes to pouring 4 cups of milk out of this measuring cup into this pan, I know I'm going to make a mess, so I'm going to be really smart today. I'm going to just measure 2 cups at a time, and hopefully I'll be a little neater. So there's 2 cups, and I'm going to pour it in and mix it up with the sugar and the cornstarch. Get rid of any lumps if possible before I put this on the stove. One nice thing about cornstarch is it does mix with cold ingredients. Hey, that was pretty good. I was neat. All right, 2 more cups. Pour and more stirring. And now I want to get this on the stove to cook. Now this is probably the most tedious part of the entire process. I'm putting the custard mix over a low heat, and gradually I want to warm everything up and bring it to a boil. It needs to boil because it needs to thicken. And I need to stir it quite frequently so I don't get any lumps. I'm just going to take a spoon and every once in a while run along the edges where the whisk isn't going to get the cornstarch to make sure everything is mixed in perfectly. This is going to take a while, at least 10 minutes. Well, it's been about 10 minutes of stirring and my custard has finally come to a boil. I'm going to let it boil for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And then I'm going to add the egg yolks. So while this is boiling, I'm going to beat the egg yolks up. And I'm turning the heat down on my custard. And I want to do the usual, which is pour a little bit, ladle a little bit of the hot custard into the egg yolks. Mix it up, just a little bit. Just to temper the egg yolks so that the heat of the custard won't be a shock to the little egg yolk system. A little bit more. I want to make sure that I have incorporated at least a half cup to a cup of the hot custard into the egg yolks before I try putting it all back in. And I usually err on the side of caution by getting as much into the egg as possible, because I do not want to traumatize my egg yolks. Okay, now I'm going to go in reverse. I'm going to add the egg yolk little by little to the hot custard. And this should give the custard a little bit of extra thickening, that wonderful yellowy color that we associate with cooked custards, and just an extra richness and depth that can't be achieved from a plain cornstarch custard or cornstarch pudding. Okay, and I'm just going to keep whisking because I want this all to be deliciously smooth, no lumps and no streaks of egg anywhere. This is the trickiest part. And I want to just cook this just a few minutes longer just to make sure that the egg is completely cooked. I don't want to be dealing with any raw egg here. Okay, that's it. I'm taking it off the heat now. One last thing for this custard. While it's still hot, just fresh off the stove, I want to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and whisk it in. The only thing left to do is just leave this alone. I need to leave it alone for at least an hour. It needs to cool before I pour it on top of this crust. Well, my custard is cooled, I would say around 45 minutes, and I can't wait any longer. So I'm going to start spooning it onto my prepared crust. I'm going to pour it over. Now it's thick, so it doesn't really pour, it kind of globs. And I want to arrange my globs sort of evenly so that when it comes time to spread it, I'm not taking up half the crust with me while I'm trying to spread things around. Okay, now all I need to do is just spread it as evenly. Just make sure every bit of the crust is covered with the custard. What I want to do now is chill this for at least 1 or 2 hours. I want it thoroughly chilled, and I'm going to stick it in my refrigerator, and so I need to cover it with some plastic wrap because who knows what strange odors are lurking there in my refrigerator. And I don't want this to have even a hint of onion or garlic or anything like that. So I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. This is the last stage of this dessert. You need a pint of heavy whipping cream. Now, I suppose you could use Cool Whip, but it's just not the same. If you're going to go to all this trouble and have a really nice dessert, you better use whipping cream. So, pint of heavy whipping cream, and to sweeten it slightly, all right, there's a ½ cup powdered sugar, and finally, for a little extra flavoring, a teaspoon of vanilla extract. All right, that's it. All right, that is it. Nice, billowy, soft, fluffy, whipped cream. All right, now what you want to do is just put big dollops of whipped cream, space them evenly on the ekmek, and then it's just time to spread this all out as evenly as you can. And try to get it an even layer, and especially try to see if you can get as close to the edge as possible so that every surface of the custard is also covered with whipped cream. Now use the spatula or knife, whatever it is that you feel the most comfortable working with, so that you can work with this whipped cream and get it covering the edges in particular. And at this point, if you want, you can go along with your knife or spatula and make little decorative swirls. Make it just a little prettier on the front. And my advice to you, save all this stuff that's accumulated on the spatula and save this for yourself and lick it as your reward for doing all this hard work. Now, this is done, but it's a little plain on top, so it needs a little decoration, and that's what we're going to do next. Now, you could top this with any kind of chopped or sliced nuts. My favorites are toasted almonds. I've toasted them lightly in a little frying pan, and I love them. I love the flavor of toasted almonds. It's kind of my favorite nut, and I think they look pretty. So that's something to do. You could also top this with maraschino cherries, chopped dates, any kind of dried fruit that strikes your fancy. And just to make sure that people realize that in spite of the whipped cream, this is a Greek dessert, how about some ground cinnamon? If everything is well chilled, you can serve it right now. Otherwise, put it in the refrigerator and make sure it is well chilled before you serve it. It's a wonderful Greek dessert. It's different though. It's got that wonderful toasted wheat layer with butter and that slightly honey-flavored cinnamon syrup. Then that rich custard, and of course whipped cream. It's everything your heart could desire, and it's very, very tasty. I'm going to have a little snitch right now. Oh, come on. Couldn't you wait for your own piece?